Welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 109, Recognize the Good and Write It Down, an encouraging words episode coming to you on Sunday, November 11th, 2018. Now, God and I have a deal. If he's trying to get through to me about something, he needs to pretty much knock on my head hard enough for me to feel it. So over the course of many years of trying to figure out how in the world can I possibly know if you're talking to me? Like, at least John, he's right there. I hear his voice or I get his text and they ding, you know? So we figured something out where I have just asked him, please help me to see things 3 times. And then I'll be like, wait, that's the 3rd time I've heard about this or seen that or whatever. Maybe I should be thinking about it a little bit. So interestingly, I've had 3 things happen in the last 6 days, something like that, that are so similar that I'm like, okay, you need to stop and think about it. And you know what's really funny is that I didn't stop and think about it until after I already started writing my notes for this episode. Like, what am I going to talk about? Oh, I'm going to talk about this. Hey, wait, that's 3 things. So let me explain. Yesterday in my time, this interview is actually going to happen Thursday, the next episode after this one. But yesterday in my time, I was interviewing Stacey, Donovan, an editor at Hallmark Publishing. And we were having a very fun conversation and having lots of laughs and also just finding out we had, similar things in common and stuff. But one of the things that she mentioned was that, when you're writing, because she also wrote the very first book, the very first original novel that Hallmark Publishing published, that was in September. And she was saying that, as a writer, sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking when you put part of your own self into the personalities and make some of your characteristics the characteristics of people in your book. And so in Sunrise Cabin, the protagonist walks outside and at sunrise, says out loud all the things that she's grateful for that day. And when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I like that. And then Stacey was saying that she actually does that too. And I was like, yeah, I should really find some way to be more, not just on track, not just to do it like a to-do list thing, but I should find some way to make this work in my life in a way. I feel like I should stop recording and try to figure out what I'm saying, but it's more interesting when you're talking to a real person, right? So I won't stop. I'm just trying to say to make it something that you want to do, not just a to-do list item. Like, how can I want to write things down or say things in a way that makes me remember all the good things happening in my life? I didn't know. I tried the writing in your journal, having a gratitude journal, and it just didn't really work for me. I don't know why. I found it boring. I'm grateful for waking up this morning. Okay, there's one. I'm grateful for my husband. It was like I was grateful for the same things all the time. So it just was not interesting for me, and I couldn't make it into a habit. Okay, so I had this interview with Stacey, and we were talking about her and her character having this kind of morning ritual of saying out loud the things they're grateful for. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I wish that were me. And then I was chatting, texting with Kristin Billerbeck, who, the sweetest woman, has also become a friend after interviewing her here on the show. In fact, I started listening to that interview again because I was like, I just love all the ways that she looks at life and how she gets it into her books. So she and I were chatting a little bit, and she wrote something like, wow, you've had a lot of things going really well in your life lately. And I was like, oh yeah. Yes, actually, I have. Now, if you've been listening to the show for a while, I've been talking on and off about burnout. And it was really, really bad in the spring of this year. It got so bad that I actually had to start trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And so Google, thank you, helped me to figure out that burnout was a serious problem in my life. And I had to figure out how to deal with it. Well, so over the last few months, I've been trying to share a little bit. I don't want to overwhelm you if you're like, stop talking about it. But I wanted to share a little bit about things that have been working for me and how I feel like I've been getting better. Well, so talking to Kristin or chatting or texting, whatever you want to say, to me, everything is talking to somebody. I was like, oh yeah, things actually have been really good in the last, especially 2, 3, 4 weeks, something like that. Well, then when I'm putting together this episode, trying to figure out like, how can I say something encouraging today, I was thinking, well, just a few days ago, my friend Becca was visiting me, and she and I were sitting on the couch doing the girly talk thing where you talk about 42 different things in 35 minutes. And my husband's like, okay, I'm going to leave you two because that's just not the way he does conversations. He likes one topic at a time. So Becca and I were bouncing around on all these topics. And I said, I'm disappointed that I haven't been able to find a way to write in my journal in a way that I want to, that it's interesting and that I feel compelled to write it down. Because the things that I've been writing and the way I've been writing it, it's not interesting to me. And she was like, well, part of it is probably the burnout, particularly like the long periods, months of not writing in it. And I was like, yeah, that's true, because I definitely didn't feel like writing anything, not even an email or replying to a text, which is totally unlike me, as you can tell from my very talkative self this morning, huh? So she and I were talking about, she read this article and it had 6 questions. And instead of just like have a gratitude journal, write down the things you're grateful for, it had more specific questions. Some of them were things like, I wrote down a couple notes because I was trying to remember, like, what are the questions again? But one of them was like, what kinds of praise did you get today? Or feedback, or, some sort of positive something that somebody said to you. One of the questions was, what kindness did you do someone today? I'm like, oh, I really like that one. Another one was, what have you done, however mundane, that gave you pleasure? And I was like, oh, see, now that would be fun for me, because I would be like, I was talking to people and interviewing them for a podcast. And then I was like, oh, this is so much fun. And then I get like so hyper afterwards. And because the time changed, these interviews are happening after dinner time, my time. So I'm like, okay, I have to calm down and so I can go to sleep in a little while. But even though like it's a part of the job I've decided to do, podcasting, I really, really like it. I really like talking to all these really interesting people. So anyway, there was all these other questions that made me think of things differently. And so much of the time, and you've heard me say this before, so much of the time, you can get through a problem or a challenge or something that you just can't see the other side of it by looking at it differently. And this helps your brain to go a different direction with your train of thought and then find a different connection that it wasn't finding before when you were looking at it this other way. So all that to say, is there anything that's been happening in your life in the last week or two where you're like, I keep running into this thing, this topic, this person, this thought, like it just keeps coming back into my frame of reference, and I'm noticing it. Maybe that's something that you need to take a little bit more of a look at. Does any of it have to do with gratitude, with being aware of how much good is happening in your life? Like even when there's hard things happening, and I've gone through some things, it's too boring for you to, I'm not going to bother you with it, but I've gone through some things where I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to beat my head against the wall. When will this be over? But somewhere along the line, I just decided like, I am not going to allow myself to get back into that sort of burnout frame of mind where every single thing was a problem and a crisis and, the situation. I was like, you know what? It's a challenge. The quicker I deal with it, the quicker it'll be over with. Some things like this latest challenge, the quicker I dealt with it, it didn't make it get over with any quicker. It still took a certain amount of time for it to finish itself. But at the time that I'm doing this recording of this interview, it finally dealt with itself about 2 hours ago. I was able to do some things on the computer, hit send, and then, now this problem is mostly behind me. So all of this to say, again, my point being, do you need to write down the things that you're like, these are all the things that are going really well in my life? Because it helps us to remember them. And remember, like, forget all that about you in your own life. If you're a writer, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast, your purpose in life is to be the recorder of histories. The recorder of the things that happen in your own life, the things that you've seen, experienced, done, what you've noticed other people doing, how the world is becoming a better place in these ways, a worse place in these ways. You might be doing it in fiction, in articles, on a blog. Your words matter, and you being the recorder of what's happening and processing it for other people, which is part of what we're doing when we write fiction. It's what I know that I do when I write fiction, is I'm processing for other people's consumption in a more entertaining way what is happening in the world and trying to find ways that we can deal with it better and end up being happier, more fulfilled people. And because I love saying this, because I'm absolutely convinced it's true, I know it's true, we can change the world. We can change the world with our written words. We can change the world with our spoken words. And that's why I do the Encouraging Words episodes, because I really want to help you to think about the important things that are happening and how do you need to record this so that you remember it, so that other people remember it, so that we don't repeat bad history, so that we can create positive, good change that will be future history. These are important things to think about. I'm actually starting to think about them more just in the last few days because of conversations with 3 different people in the last week. So maybe this is something that's come up in your periphery in the last couple of days or couple of weeks. If so, sit down and give it some thought. I hope it helps you. I hope at the very least you're encouraged to write down more of the things going on in your life, or finding some way to record things in a way that blesses you, makes you feel good about spending that time. I hope that you have a fabulous week. Remember, in just a few days on Thursday, what is it, November 15th, I think? That will be the day that Stacey comes and talks to us about Hallmark publishing, so don't miss that episode. Have a wonderful nanoing week if that's what you're doing this week. And if you're just writing on your own schedule, good for you. Keep writing, enjoy it, keep track of what you're doing, what new ideas you're coming up with that you're like, wow, I don't think I've actually ever thought of it that way. And write that down somewhere too. I love you guys. I hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you later.